wave of high-level resignations in response to the Trump administration continues to swell. This is not people being fired by the Trump administration or people taking them up on their threat to resign or else. This is people resigning on principle after they tried to stop the Trump administration from doing something they're not supposed to be able to do. Late last week, you will remember the Department of Justice had 7 high-profile resignations, all of them over the decision by the Trump administration to drop corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams, which the Trump administration was demanding explicitly in exchange for a promise from Mayor Adams that he would help with Trump's anti-immigrant policies. To understand why this was such a Rubicon that principled, even conservative members of the Justice Department were not willing to cross. Today, a former U.S. attorney named Carol Lamb drew an analogy in an op-ed for the New York Times that I think is quite clarifying. She said, quote, imagine, for example, a president agreeing to hold off on bringing corruption charges against a U.S. senator, as long as that senator signs on to the president's agenda. In light of last week's events with the Adams case, this crass scenario has suddenly become plausible. I think Carol Lamb is right there. In fact, you could imagine the Trump administration saying that for a whole swath of senators. You know, all the senators on this committee, we're going to bring sedition charges against all of you, unless you do X. What's the difference, right? After those 7 resignations over the Adams affair last week, the question of what's actually going to happen to Adams in that case is up in the air. New York's Governor Kathy Hochul has been considering whether to use her unusual powers as New York State's chief executive to remove the mayor from office. Oddly, in New York State, the governor does have that power to remove the mayor of New York City. Today, she met with key city leaders for a discussion about that. Tomorrow, the federal judge that's been overseeing the Adams case has ordered both the mayor and federal prosecutors to appear before him in court and explain the rationale for asking that these charges be dismissed. That could end up being anything from a pro forma hearing to a real opportunity for that judge to grill the prosecutors about why they're taking this extraordinary action of dropping this case, particularly given that there's been all these high-profile resignations from the Justice Department saying this is an unprincipled and potentially illegal thing to do. So we'll be watching that closely. But again, all of this comes amid these principled resignations from career prosecutors at the Justice Department. And today we got another one, and this one is unrelated to the Eric Adams case. Denise Chung is a veteran prosecutor. Until recently, she was head of the criminal division at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. That's the same office President Trump has put under the auspices of a defense lawyer who was at January 6th himself and whose clients included January 6th defendants. Today, Denise Chung, a career prosecutor in that office, the head of its criminal division, resigned. NBC News reporting tonight, quote, veteran federal prosecutor resigns over bank freeze order from Trump appointee. Bank freeze order. In her resignation letter, Chung wrote that she was asked to review documentation to open a criminal investigation into whether a contract had been unlawfully awarded during President Biden's administration. The Washington Post was first to publish the resignation letter. In the letter, Ms. Chung said that she did not believe there was sufficient evidence to freeze bank assets in this matter and that she lacked the legal authority to do so. She apparently was nevertheless ordered to do it. She says she was then asked for her resignation. When NBC News reporter Ryan Riley asked DOJ for comment on that resignation, the Justice Department responded by saying this, quote, refusing a basic request to pause an investigation so officials can examine the potential waste of government funds is not an act of heroism, just a failure to follow the chain of command. It's unclear what they mean when they say a basic request to pause an investigation, since Denise Chung says she was actually ordered to launch an unpredicated investigation, not pause one. If the administration can order prosecutors to use the criminal justice system to shut down programs they don't like, to freeze the assets of people they perceive to be their enemies, even before the courts get a chance to rule on the case, that would turn the Justice Department into a whole new tool set that a power-hungry president could use against his political enemies. What should a prosecutor do in that case if they believe that bringing such a case, bringing such a criminal matter would be unpredicated? What should they do? Today, Denise Chung decided the only thing to do was resign. Joining us now is NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, thanks for joining us tonight. Let me ask if your reporting has advanced beyond what I've just explained, or if I got any of that wrong.
Yeah, no, you got it right. But the one thing that's been a little bit of a new development is the EPA investigation that they are launching here. Sort of been able to figure out what some of that related to, and it all actually comes back. Apparently, this is according to the press release that was put out by the EPA administrator that linked to a video that was filmed by Project Veritas. So that's James O'Keefe's former outlet. That's the video that appears to be a question at the center of this that was passed along. But what's interesting is that Ms. Chung, Denise Chung, was so steeped, I think, in Justice Department traditions that when you read through that letter, there's no direct reference to who they were actually talking about here, because that's very much in keeping with Justice Department protocol, keeping within the four corners of the document you're filing. You're not referencing someone who is not alleged to have committed any criminal activity in that paperwork, and she knew probably that letter would get more widely distributed, and so she even followed those protocols there. So that's something that, having been for 24 years at the Justice Department, is obviously very important to her and sort of a core part of who she is as a person.
But just to bear down on this and get to the nub here, I think, particularly for people who aren't lawyers, who aren't necessarily steeped in what Justice Department protocol is, what she's saying is, I was ordered by political appointees to bring a criminal investigation that is not warranted by the facts. And as part of bringing that criminal investigation, they wanted me to seize assets in a bank account, even though there's no reason to bring a criminal investigation which would warrant such an extreme step. That's basically what she's laying out, even though she's doing it in very lawyerly terms, as the grounds for which her resignation, she thought, was warranted.
Yes, precisely. I mean, the shorter version of it was, at first she was asked to launch this investigation, and they were like, well, we don't actually care about all that much. The important part is freezing the assets. But the problem is that you need that first part in order to have that second part, right? You don't talk about freezing someone's assets unless there's probable cause. And what you have here is the government, what she was requested to do is send a letter from the FBI or from the U.S. Attorney's Office in that case, that if the FBI refused to do so, saying, ordering a bank, that's the key part, ordering a bank to freeze these assets when she knew upon reviewing the evidence that there was not probable cause that a crime had been committed. This was, always going to be a little bit of a stretch of an investigation, and especially with Ed Martin at the helm, who's shown himself to be, somewhat of a concierge, a prosecutorial concierge service for, Elon Musk or whoever, Donald Trump asked him to sort of go after. I think that's what she was sort of concerned about ultimately here, that this is what, this was another one of these orders. Ed Martin just hasn't gained the respect of the office. There was even an email a few weeks ago in which he had left his gloves sitting around the office at some point, and there's one of these inter-office emails saying, who left their gloves here? And it turned out to be Ed Martin. But that's, he's gone after time and time again and shown he's willing to go after sort of the president's enemies, including on late Friday when he posted on his official account, which he set up separately from his main X account, saying that he was going to save their papers, speaking about Jack Smith, as well as a private law firm that had offered him pro bono legal services during his tenure as special counsel. So what you're talking about here is someone who's really targeting directly individuals who have sort of come onto Donald Trump's radar, Rachel.
Yeah, and it's one thing to threaten to be a concierge prosecution service for the president's enemies, as you put it. It's another thing to actually be the prosecutor who has to demand that a bank seize assets when there's no factual predicate for that investigation that would lead to such a step. I mean, that's something that a judge will eventually review, and that prosecutor would ethically and professionally be on the hook for that, regardless of whether or not the U.S. attorney told him to do it. I mean, what they're asking these folks to do, I imagine this is not going to be the last resignation we hear about. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley, thanks for helping us understand this tonight. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And actually, I'm the one who left the gloves there. So I'll be back. I'm going to go pick them up.